Aloha! Welcome to the Live Ukulele podcast. My name is Brad Bordessa. Thank you for joining me today. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to choose songs, appropriate songs for the situation you're playing in, or even just songs that are appropriate for you style-wise and as a player. It's something that I see a lot of people not really consider. They just play the songs that they want to play. And there are some things to think about. Before we begin, if you're not already, please go check out my newsletter and subscribe. It's the best way for me to stay in touch with you folks, share what I'm doing here on the podcast and with my other teaching resources that I create. You can sign up if you go to liveukulele.com/sign up, or you can just go to liveukulele.com and look on the homepage for the link to the newsletter and make your way there to the sign up form. That way, it may seem like a small thing, but just because I don't really have social media for liveukulele.com, I'm a little bit old school. I try and just do things via email. And if you're willing to open your email inbox to me, promise I won't spam you. I only send 1, maybe 2 emails a month outside of product launches when I send a handful of things relating to the new product. Then please join in and stay up to date with the news and things here from Live Ukulele. Choosing songs is on my mind because I am heading out of town for a week for Uncle George's workshop. Last podcast was also about this, but I'm still thinking about it because this coming Wednesday night, which will be the last Wednesday once you finally hear the podcast, and it comes out on Saturday. Let's look at some dates here. I'm playing the 31st at the Slack Key Show, and you'll be hearing this on the 3rd of June. But I need to decide on some songs to play at the show. I'm not exactly sure what the format will be. Usually there are a handful of the instructors that all take the stage at once, and everybody plays one song, maybe 2 if there's enough time, and they go down the line and just share songs. And there are some things to consider about this, and some things that I've got a list of songs that I can play. I can play for 3 hours by myself, and it's no problem. But in a situation where it's very specific, it's kind of a showcase, I'm playing with people that I don't normally play with, there are some considerations that I need to make, and I thought I would share some of these with you so you can think about them for when you're playing your own gigs or just wanting to maybe learn a song, how to choose songs that are more appropriate for what you like to do. Because first off, it's very easy to be tempted to play songs that you like. Right? This is very natural. You hear a song on the radio, or you have a song that you have a lot of connection to, a song that you grew up listening to, that kind of a thing, and you want to play that song on the ukulele. And you can do anything, right? I'm not here to tell you that you can't do certain things, but what I've learned over the years is that there are a lot of songs that just don't translate well, or don't translate well for certain artists, certain musicians, certain players. I can only really speak for myself with this, but I like a broad range of music, but it's only very rarely that I hear a song and I go, oh, maybe I should learn that, and then actually learn it and feel like it works for what I do. And it's something that I want to bring onto my repertoire, onto my song list, something that I want to share with people in the future. And so it really comes from experience of having learned a bunch of songs, knowing what is going to kind of work for your style. But for me, I try and think of things that on a couple of different levels. I try and think of relevance as far as the message of the song and the feel of the song. And I also think about what genre the song is coming from and where it's going to. If it's a bash and punk song, am I going to try and just play that acoustic on my ukulele as it is? Or do I want to cover it in a certain way where I bring a little bit of an interpretation to that song. So, for instance, like a number of years ago, I learned how to play 4th of July by Soundgarden. And obviously, I can't sing like Chris Cornell. I can't play my ukulele so that it sounds like that super detuned guitar that rocks so hard on the recording. So what I did is like, okay, well, that would be kind of pushing the limit, but I think I can pull it off. I'll play it kind of like jazzy. I'll slow it way down and I'll play it with jazz chords so that it feels like it should be a sparse arrangement. Just the way that I play it, it'll sound like, even if people know the song, they're not going to be like, oh, well, it doesn't sound like the recording. Hopefully, instead, they're thinking about, oh, it sounds like an interesting version of this song, and I get it. It makes sense in the context of the genre and the way it's being played. It's not just like, oh, it doesn't sound like the recording. It's like, oh, that's a very different take that kind of works because of the way it's presented. And so it's very easy, especially as a newer musician, it's easy to hear a song, want to learn the song, and then just play it at face value. And a lot of times, especially when coming from more pop and rock genres, it's really hard to do this convincingly. Like, the worst thing in the world for me is listening to somebody play like a straight ahead Jimi Hendrix cover on the ukulele, and they like try to make it sound just like Jimmy, right? And that's why if you listen to like James Hill's Voodoo Child, it makes more sense because he was like, well, here I am, just one dude playing an ukulele. How can I make this a vibe that I can capture and I can use that's appropriate for this cover? And I think that he pulled it off because he didn't try and just like play it exactly like Jimmy and expect the invisible drums that he didn't actually have with him to fill the space, which a lot of people do. They just kind of play the song and they play their ukulele like Jimmy would maybe play the guitar part, but the rest of the presentation isn't cohesive. It doesn't make sense because there's no power trio. There is certainly not the Jimmy chops there in most cases. So it's just a matter of being mindful of what is appropriate and what is going to come across easiest or best. I find that a lot of times the songs that end up kind of deepest in my repertoire and the songs that I am that I like playing the most, that I like sharing the most, that I feel are most representative of my sound are the ones that translate easiest. And it's very much a sense of when I learn the song, if I sit down and I listen to it and I try and figure out how to pick the melody, figure out how the chord progression goes, then I can pretty easily assess this is going to work because it just kind of feels like it's going to work. Or I can kind of tell like, I don't think this is going to do what I want it to do. And I think that anything, if I try and push it, it's going to sound like I'm really trying. And that's what I don't want to sound like. And I think that it is a good thing to be aware of is if you sound like you're trying, you sound like you're trying, right? It's something to try and avoid at all costs because you want to be able to present songs in a confident way that comes across as, oh, wow, they're really nailing this, as a like, oh, well, it sounds like they're really trying hard to make this work and it's kind of not getting there. So that's sort of the first thing that considering songs, the first big picture thing is kind of genre, how you're going to cover it, what your impression of the song is, and how you're going to present it yourself. Depending on your situation, maybe you have a band that wants to play a song. Maybe with a band, you can get closer to the sound of the original recording. I have a band, and it's basically a full band, drum kit, bass, and rhythm guitar, lead guitar, and a couple of singers. And between all of us, we can pretty much pull off any sort of like album song that you might hear. And so we play, funky hip hop, R&B, reggae, rock songs. and we can cover them fairly convincingly because we have the tools to do so. Not that we choose to do everything exactly like the album. We try and put our own spin on it, and we don't get hung up on how the songs actually go on the recording, which is kind of funny, actually. We've just onboarded a new drummer, and he's like learning the songs from the recordings because we tell him like, oh yeah, we played this, and this song. And so he looks it up on Spotify or whatever. And he listens to the song. He's like, oh, well, they do this on the recording. And we're all like, yeah, I don't remember that, because we've played the songs for so many years that in a lot of cases, the song is just how we play it. We've just it's evolved, and we've added things to it and changed things. And it's just kind of like, it's our version of the song is how we know the song at this point in time. So that's kind of interesting. But there are also situations where I know that I'm not going to be playing with the band. So there are songs, like a lot of those songs, and the majority of those songs, I'm not going to play at a solo set. Because without the band, without the context of kind of that genre, the song isn't going to stand up very well by itself. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind, is that you're going to play different songs when you're playing by yourself, and you're going to play different songs when you're playing in a group, because you can achieve different things in a group. It's not one is better than the other, or you should get a band so you can do these things. It's just a matter of considering what you can pull off and what you can get away with without sounding like you're really trying. So outside of genre and cover choices, you want to select songs that are appropriate for the moment. And this has to do more with performance than it does just general, like, oh, I want to learn this song, or I want to play this song with my ukulele group. You have to consider what kind of a performance you're going into and what the crowd is going to be, what the expectation is, and where you want to land in the Venn diagram of all those things. Because, okay, so for instance, I'm going to play at the Slack Key show. It's a show that features, legendary, world famous, world class Hawaiian Slack Key guitar players from around the world. Uncle George brings them to Maui to showcase their skills, to share their Slack Key and sometimes ukulele, but mostly Slack Key, with the crowd that comes to his show every week. And so it's a very Hawaiian show. It's, Hawaiian music is the featured music at the show. And so that would be like the first consideration, is like, if I sing a Hawaiian song, that's probably pretty safe. Just like any Hawaiian song is going to be pretty safe, as long as it's not Sudden Rush or something that's really genre-wise really outside of the box. If I'm not going to do a Hawaiian song, I have to think, how does this have any relevance to Hawaiian music? Like, is this a song that was written here in Hawaii by a Hawaiian band? Is it like an Uncle Liko Martin song, like All Hawaii Stands Together, or Sunlight, Moonlight, Waimanalo Blues? One of those songs that's like, it's an English song, but it's very Hawaiian at heart. It has that Hawaiian spirit, and it's accepted as a part of Hawaiian music. Or is it a song that maybe somebody's covered at some point? Because Hawaiian bands over time have covered a lot of popular mainstream songs that, and in Hawaii, you ask people who played certain songs, they're going to tell you like, oh, the Ka'au Crater Boys wrote that song, right? And they'd be surprised to know that like, oh no, that's actually the Ka'au Crater Boys covered that song, and they brought it into an island sound. But that's actually like a mainstream song. And I'm sure there are songs that I think of from a local band that are not actually from that local band. They're a cover of something. And I think that's very true across Hawaiian music. But also, if it's been accepted in that way, then maybe that's a more appropriate song to bring, as opposed to something that's just like fresh off the radio that has, that's the only connection that it has with people, is like maybe they've heard it on the radio. And that's not a very strong connection for a show that has such lineage in Hawaiian music. So Hawaiian song's good, is basically the takeaway from that part of the PowerPoint slide. But the other thing that I have to think about is what is my lineup going to look like? Who am I going to play with? Because there's, whatever handful of instructors that are part of the workshop that are in town, they're going to play at the Slack Key Show. I don't usually know who I'm going to play with until the night of. So I need to have a set of songs prepared. And this is something that, I'm working on right here in the days leading up to, is like figuring out what songs I want to really brush up on, make sure they're really super duper cherry. What songs do I want to play with which people, right? If I end up playing with Uncle Kevin Brown and Uncle Sonny Lim, I'm going to probably play different songs than if I end up on stage with Peter D'Aquino and Brian Tolentino, right? It's like different people are going to have different musical feels, different musical specialties. And as a performer, bringing a cohesiveness to a show like this, I feel like it's my job to create the best show possible, right? People come for a show. They come to it's not about me. It's about their experience of the music that I can in part help share, right? That's really the job of a performer, is that they're bringing you into the music and sharing the music with you. So if I'm in a certain configuration with guys, I need to be able to think well, is this a song they know? Is it a song they're familiar with? That usually helps, especially in a jam situation like this where we haven't practiced at all. We just go on stage and we play and we hope that we can figure it out. So songs that are kind of classics, songs that people have heard before, they're familiar with how they go if they haven't actually played them themselves. That's all very important. And that repertoire, that familiarity is going to change from generation to generation. So if I end up on stage with one of the uncles, they're going to, maybe be super familiar with stuff that came out in the 70s and the 80s, right? When they were kind of really hot on the scene and were listening to new music and, when it was their moment in the spotlight kind of. Whereas the younger crowd is going to know a different set. They're going to know the uncle's music, but maybe not necessarily the music that influenced the uncles directly, right? So every generation, the influences change. And so if I want to go back and really understand how Uncle Ledward got his sound and became who he is as a musician, I have to go back and listen to who Uncle Ledward was inspired by, who he played with, all of those kinds of things. And that's how you try and find, where the overlap is with these musicians, so that when you're on stage, you can play the nicest music possible. And so let's just say, for example, maybe I'm playing with Stephen Inglis and Peter D. That would be a more contemporary grouping. And, maybe I can get away with something that is a little bit more modern, maybe in what it is, how it relates to Hawaiian music as a whole. Maybe it's like an English language song. It's a little bit newer, something along those lines, or maybe it's a more modern rendition of an old Hawaiian song. That might fit in a little bit more appropriately with those guys' understanding of music and Hawaiian music and how everything goes together. Whereas, if I was playing with Uncle Kevin, I know Uncle Kevin is a massive library of old school crossover songs that have English lyrics. He can play just for days and days at a time, I imagine, and just one after another classic songs that maybe aren't actually Hawaiian songs, but he makes them sound Hawaiian because he's played them in that way. And so I might want to bring an old English language song, like something from Country Comfort, like I mentioned, Sunlight, Moonlight. That's something that, I've heard Uncle Kevin play that, or I've played that with him before. Little Street in Singapore, these kind of swingy old school songs, because I know what he does. So as the musician, as the performer, as the player, when you're playing with somebody, and especially in a performance situation where you're trying to create the best music possible, you want to try and meet in the middle so that instead of just like, well, this is what I want to play, that's, not going to necessarily create the best outcome. You might be able to present the song that you actually want to play, but it might just kind of be abrasive on the musicality of the person you're playing with, and they might not be able to fit in with you. You might not fit in with them. And then you're basically playing by yourself, which sort of isn't the point of a collaboration when you're playing and jamming with somebody, right? You want to play with them. And if they're not on the same page as you, that's really tough. So you've got to think of the kind of songs and the style of the songs and the genre of the songs and the era of the songs that you want to play with the person. And then you also have kind of the last piece of the puzzle is the audience, right? What does the audience expect to hear? What does the audience want to hear? And what can you convince the audience that they want to hear? That they'll be excited that you shared that song with them, even if it wasn't something that they expected, right? There's only so much that this Venn diagram overlaps. Maybe if I'm up on stage with Peter D, I want to play a reggae song because I know that Peter plays in a reggae band and we could just totally jam a reggae song. But are the snowbirds in the audience going to relate to that? Is that going to push their envelope? There's got to be some way to tie it in. Maybe it's a reggae song that talks about Hawaiian style things in a funny way, right? Humor is a great kind of equalizer and a way to bring a common ground to everything. If you could, if you were to like maybe play like Mr. Sancho Lee with a reggae chank, you'd get away with it because it was an otherwise classic Hawaiian hapa haole song that is funny, and you're changing it a little bit to be more modern. You might get away with that. But if you were to just play like a straight reggae song, what does that have to do with anything at the Slack Key Show, right? So there's a certain sense of like, yes, we as musicians are often chameleons, and that any of us at any given point could play in all kinds of different genres, right? You just like let us explode into whatever musical directions we want to go, and any of us at any given point are going to ping pong in some random direction. Like I play with my band, we rock out, we play some rock songs, we play some funk songs, we play some like hip hop kinds of things. Peter plays, maybe more reggae, contemporary island music sorts of things. Uncle Sonny Lim plays like the straight ahead, more modern Hawaiian interpretations of old Hawaiian songs. Uncle Led has the super slack key angle. Uncle Kevin has, if you listen back on some of Uncle Kevin Brown's old recordings, it's really amazing what they were doing at the time. It was sort of revolutionary, but they were singing like jazz harmonies on songs that were, at the time, they were like modern. Like if you listen to the Waiehu Sons, which is Uncle Kevin's old band, there's a version on that album, the first album at least, I guess. There's a version of Koke'e, which Uncle Dennis would have written like a handful of years earlier at best. So at the time, it was like a new Hawaiian classic song, and it was probably modern, and people were like not familiar with it. Like, oh, that's a new song. And they took it and they harmonized it all like jazz style. Real interesting, kind of almost dissonant jazz harmonies. And, obviously there's a background there. So you could take these guys and put them in any situation, and a lot of times they would be fine. But what you can do isn't always what you should do, right? Just because you can play 16th notes at 140 BPMs in your solo and just diddly 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 diddly, you shouldn't necessarily do that, right? It doesn't mean anything that you just play a bunch of notes. That's just shredding and noodling, and nobody really cares. You got to put together an emotion and get it across and play something meaningful with those 16th notes if you want to use them. And so same sort of thing where you got to bring it all together and choose something that is going to be relevant for everybody and creates joy for everybody. because that's really the main job of the performer, is to make people happy. You know, they paid to come to the show because they wanted to hear some great music, hear some stories, have a good time, and enjoy themselves. And if my choice isn't, working towards that goal of making everybody happy, then I'm kind of blowing it as at my part of the job. And so those are just a handful of the considerations that you make when you're choosing songs. But I think those are some of the main ones, and a lot of people don't think about it. They just grab a song that they like because they like the recorded version of the song. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with playing Brown Eyed Girl, but you have to think about all the aforementioned things. Does this work for me? Can I pull this off on a solo ukulele if I'm just playing by myself? Am I going to change it in a way that makes it seem relevant in the moment? Is this what the crowd expects to hear? Is this something that the crowd will like even if they didn't expect to hear it? Or am I just going to rub them the wrong way? Right? If you're at a DJ club in Berlin and you bring your ukulele up on stage and plug in and play them Brown Eyed Girl on your ukulele, that's not going to fly. That's not the expectations don't match at all. And so that's the trick of every gig, and that's part of being a musician, and especially a performing musician, is kind of assessing the situation and playing the right song for the moment. Another thing that is kind of related and interesting is when you're playing for a longer time, when like you're the performer at the gig, you're playing the gig, it's your gig, and you're playing for hours at a time, you have to think about how your music is overall impacting the vibe of where you're playing. Are you playing at a restaurant where you're supposed to just be background music and mellow and relaxing, right? Is it like a romantic restaurant with the dim lights and the candles? And, are you in the back just strumming out and playing, all of your upbeat songs as hard as you can? Maybe that's not appropriate for the moment. Maybe you should be more jazzy and bring out some of your slower songs, your more romantic songs, and just project in that way. Or are you playing at like a farmer's market where people are just waking up, they're having their coffee, and they're, starting their day and looking forward to their day? Maybe you don't want to play all your slow, jazzy, romantic songs at the farmer's market. Maybe you want to kick it up a notch so that everybody's kind of pumped. Woo, we're out and about, we're drinking coffee, we're eating breakfast, we're spending money, we're supporting local farmers. It's a little bit more of an upbeat scene. And then, of course, you get to like, showcases or like maybe you're playing at a bar. A lot of times, like, the purpose of music at a bar is to have people like super pumped, and maybe they're dancing and they're feeling good and they've had a couple beers, and maybe they should order another beer because it feels good and they want to keep it going. The role of the music that you play is going to be different in each of those locations, and you need to be able to read the room and figure out kind of where you need to fit in the moment. And at first, this is kind of tough to do, but you figure it out over time. And if you don't figure it out, you probably don't get the gig, because there's not a huge amount of venues that are going to bring you back if you totally don't meet the expectations and you're not relevant to what they're expecting their musicians to provide. If you're at a bar and you're just playing real slow romantic songs, and the proprietor is expecting you to get people pumped and get people dancing, and people aren't dancing and they're not buying more beer, it's not that your music is bad, it's just that it's maybe not the right match for that moment. And so that's just something to navigate. It's something that I've kind of learned over the years, is that it's okay to say no. It's okay to pick the gigs where I know I'm going to be appropriate. It's, you have to do, I would rather say no to a gig than to go into it knowing that I'm not going to match their expectations, and I'm not going to be able to really provide the kind of music that they want. Like I've kind of stopped doing weddings because of that, because a lot of times the weddings, they want to hear songs that seem like Happy Hawaii, right? It's like a couple that comes in from the mainland. They're getting married here on the beach, and they want a solo ukulele player to play Somewhere Over the Rainbow and Wagon Wheel and Ho Hey, and I'm Yours. And that's fine, but that's not my gig. Those aren't songs that I like really feel connected to. That genre doesn't do much for me. I don't have much experience there. And so at the end of the day, I've gotten to a point where I say no to a lot of unknown wedding gigs, because I know a lot of times there's that expectation of like, oh, will you play Somewhere Over the Rainbow? Will you play this kind of indie folk song that's hot right now? And A, I don't want to play that kind of music, but B, I also know that even if I were to learn the song, I wouldn't be the best person to play that, and I wouldn't be able to authentically present that kind of music, because that's not really what I do. So it's a little bit, especially in like the super professional sense where you're out hustling gigs and getting calls and like, oh, can you play the gig? You gain experience of knowing where you're going to be appropriate and where not. And I know this isn't relevant to a lot of players, because not everybody is out and about getting gigs, playing gigs. But if you are, certainly it's something to think about. And even if you're not, it's interesting, because I think that choosing songs wisely can really bump up your enjoyment of the song. You can feel more connected to the song if you feel like you are really capturing something well. Maybe you're adapting it or changing the song in a certain way, and you like that, and it's like, wow, I feel like this sounds really good the way that I'm playing this. That's important, because if you always feel like I'm not quite hitting the mark, if you're always feeling like you're falling short, that's discouraging. So, approach the songs that you're learning maybe with a little bit more skepticism and a little bit more critically to see, like, is this a good match for me? Is this working? And just because you learn one James Taylor song and you aren't quite capturing it, it doesn't mean that you can't play like that kind of acoustic folk music. It doesn't mean you can't do that. It just means that maybe that one song, it's in a weird key that really only works on guitar. There are moments like this where you have to work so incredibly hard to capture that music on a different instrument that it's just, there's no way to play it easily, or there's no way to play it as easily and as convincing as on the original instrument. And sometimes you just have to accept that, and that's kind of a hard lesson. But it really does improve the quality of the music you can play if you learn the limits of what you can get away with and what you can convincingly play on your own instrument. But just something to think about. If something's not working, if you think something's not working, it's probably not working. Try and figure out why, and then try and see if there's a different song that does work and figure out why. And then in the future, as you move forwards, you're going to have a little bit more of a toolbox to assess whether a song is going to work for you in the future or not. And I think just the main takeaway is that not everything has to work. A lot of times we're accustomed to forcing things, making things happen, but really with music, you can't do that. If it's just not working, it's just not working. It's fine. It's art. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and it's not really a lose if you realize that the song isn't working, because the lose would be to continue forcing, to continue playing that song, and then you feel discouraged every time. Just let it go. It's okay. And find something else to replace it that you can feel good about every time you play it. I think that's the main takeaway. That's the best thing to think about here, is just make sure you're playing songs that you really can get a grasp on and feel like you're succeeding at playing. All right. So thank you for tuning in. This one was a little bit off the cuff, but hopefully it was interesting and insightful. It's like all just kind of, after hours access to whatever the heck is going on in Brad's brain, especially when I'm kind of at a loss for a podcast. I don't have a topic that has come up that I want to address, or I don't have an interview going on. This is what you get, and I hope it's passable. I hope you like it. I believe coming up next month, as long as everything goes to plan, I'll be talking to Chris Fuchigami mid-June and should be able to get a Chris Fuchigami in person here in the studio interview out on the 17th of June. Hope to see you then. Please tune in. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. And like I said in the intro, if you're not already, please go sign up for my newsletter so we can stay in touch. I won't bug you. If I do, you can always unsubscribe. There's a nice link right at the bottom of the email. Don't try and hide it. If you don't want to be subscribed, I don't want to be sending you emails. It's as simple as that. But if you do, there's some good tips in there. And certainly I send out updates on when interesting podcasts go up and little bit news updates and certainly product updates as I'm working on new learning materials, new teaching materials. I can never tell. Is it teaching materials or learning materials? It's learning materials for the student, perhaps you. It's teaching materials from my side. But I think it can be understood in both ways. The idea is that I am creating material that will help other people learn to play ukulele better. That's a little more clunky to say, but perhaps more precise. Anyways, keep an eye out for Groove Ukulele. My progress is going to halt for a week because I'll be working my butt off over at Uncle George's workshop. But after I get back, the videos are more than halfway done. The ebook should be just a couple more edits and we'll be out the door. And then I got to figure out how to launch it, what kind of supplementary material I want to provide, because I want to throw out kind of some free lessons to help introduce people to the idea of Groove Ukulele. We'll see what we can come up to, but keep an eye out for that. Maybe late June, early July, fingers crossed. And really looking forward to sharing that content with the world. If you are interested in strumming better, feeling like your strums are kind of robotic and you're not really hitting the mark as far as smooth rhythm playing goes, then hopefully it will help you. I hate to say silver bullet, but it's the kind of thing where when people learn it and people start working through it, it's like, oh, aha, I get it now. So maybe not silver bullet, but hopefully light bulb. And if not light bulb, then hopefully helpful practice for helping the majority of people become better strummers, better rhythm players on their ukulele. Keep an eye out for that. Groove Ukulele. It's an ebook coming to a liveukulele.com near you. All right. Be well out there. Keep on jamming. Take care of one another. And I'll catch you in the next episode. Hui ho.